Everyone knows the Beatles are in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but you may not realize that their roots in the Rock Hall run much deeper than just that little band from Liverpool. We'll explore all of the Fab Four's Rock Hall connections next on Track by Track. Hey everybody, my name's Kyle and this is Track by Track, music reviews, news, and commentary. Thanks for tuning in today, and if this is your first time here, please take a second to click subscribe so that you won't miss future reviews and more. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is home to hundreds of legendary acts, but perhaps none have been as impactful as the Beatles. Naturally, the Fab Four have long since been inducted into the Hall of Fame, but between the members' solo inductions and the inclusion or involvement of many of the group's closest collaborators, the Beatles' presence in the Rock Hall is wide-reaching. Let's take a deeper dive and see just how extensive that influence actually has become. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inducted its inaugural class back in 1986, and if you think about what acts you'd probably want to include when starting off such an audacious institution, I'm sure the Beatles would be near the top of that list. Although the 10 acts inducted in that first year does include a legendary lineup with names like Elvis Presley, Buddy Holly, Chuck Berry, Little Richard, and James Brown, the Beatles were not among them. In fact, the Beatles were not inducted until the Rock Hall's third year in 1988. To be fair, though, that's just following Rock Hall rules, which dictate that acts become eligible 25 years after the release of their first recording. For the Beatles, that was their first hit, Love Me Do, in 1962. So even though they didn't qualify for induction in the first year of the Rock Hall's existence, they were still, rightfully, a walk-on in their first year of eligibility. And just look at the class of 1988. I mean, pretty much every year of Rock Hall inductions are an all-star lineup, but I don't know that any year has ever been quite as big as this. In addition to the Beatles, other members of the 1988 induction class included the Beach Boys, Stevie Wonder, two major influences on the Beatles, Dion and Bob Dylan, and the Fab Four's legendary UK rivals, the Rolling Stones. Speaking of the Stones, it was Mick Jagger himself who handled the induction duties for the Beatles during the ceremony. On hand to accept the award were George Harrison and Ringo Starr, along with Yoko Ono and Sean and Julian Lennon. Absent from the ceremony was Paul McCartney, who declined to appear at the event due to ongoing legal disputes related to the band's music. 6 years later, McCartney finally did appear at the podium for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's annual induction ceremony in 1994, but this time it was to bestow the honor of induction upon his songwriting partner, the late John Lennon. 25 years following his first solo hit in 1969, John Lennon became the first Beatle to earn induction into the Rock Hall as a solo artist, with Yoko Ono, of course, accepting on his behalf. That Lennon solo Rock Hall induction put him among a rare group of acts with multiple induction honors, but he wasn't the first to achieve that feat. 50s R&B singer Clyde McPhatter was the first artist to be inducted twice, once in 1987 as a solo act and then again the following year as a member of the Drifters. The second artist to achieve dual induction, and again in back-to-back years, was someone very familiar to the Beatles. Eric Clapton earned his first Rock Hall induction as a member of the Yardbirds in 1992, and then again as a member of Cream in 1993. Clapton would go on to become the only act so far to earn a third Rock Hall induction, which came in the year 2000 in recognition of his solo career. Then in 1999, it was McCartney's turn to join the Two-Timers Club. Not in his first year of eligibility, it should be noted. He first became eligible for induction as a solo artist in 1993. His 1999 induction was on his first nomination, though. Also worth noting, it was indeed a solo induction. Neither his wife Linda McCartney nor any other members of the band Wings were included. That's led some McCartney fans to speculate on the prospects of Paul becoming a three-time inductee if the Rock Hall would put Wings in. But if I'm being honest, I think that's highly unlikely. Interestingly enough, Paul returned to the Rock Hall the following year to induct American singer-songwriter James Taylor, who also has a surprising connection to the Beatles. More on that in a moment. The final solo Beatle to be inducted into the Rock Hall under the Performers category was the late George Harrison in 2004. Harrison's induction came just 3 years after his death, with his Traveling Wilburys bandmates Tom Petty and Jeff Lynne doing the ceremonial honors. George's widow, Olivia Harrison, accepted the award alongside their son, the already accomplished singer-songwriter Danny Harrison. Danny, along with Petty, Lynne, and others, would share the stage later in the evening for a tribute to George. That, of course, was the now legendary all-star performance of While My Guitar Gently Weeps, featuring fellow 2004 Rock Hall inductee Prince with an epic and unforgettable guitar solo. Incidentally, Danny Harrison would end up returning the favor to Jeff Lynne in 2017 when he returned to the Rock Hall to induct Lynne's group, the Electric Light Orchestra. Now, you may be wondering why I said George Harrison was the final Beatle to be inducted as a solo artist. What about Ringo Starr? Yes, Ringo was indeed inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2015, but not in the performers category. Rather, he was given the honor in the category of musical excellence. This category was originally created in the year 2000 to recognize sidemen, or the talented people who helped support the headliners. Then, in 2010, it was expanded to include a greater variety of inductees and renamed the award for musical excellence. Paul McCartney again returned to the Rock Hall to induct his former bandmate. Of course, the Beatles didn't become legends all on their own. They were surrounded by many other talented individuals who all collectively contributed to the group's long-lasting legacy. Those efforts have not gone unnoticed by the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. For starters, the man who should rightfully be considered the fifth Beatle has also been inducted. Producer George Martin had a hand in practically every Beatles studio recording ever made. Prior to working with the Fab Four, Martin's studio background was predominantly with classical recordings and, believe it or not, comedy albums. Martin brought a distinct level of sophistication to the Beatles' studio sessions and was an enthusiastic partner in their more adventurous recording endeavors. In 1999, George Martin was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with the Ahmet Ertegun Award, an award reserved for non-performers. 15 years later, that same honor was bestowed upon Brian Epstein. In 1961, Epstein happened to catch a Beatles performance at the Cavern Club in Liverpool, and he knew they had something special. He signed on as their manager, changed their image, introduced them to George Martin, and the rest, as they say, is history. Epstein continued to manage the band until his death in 1967. He was inducted into the Rock Hall by Peter Asher, a now legendary producer in his own right, who also was a close collaborator with the Beatles, even helping get their Apple Records company up and running, signing the aforementioned James Taylor to the label for his debut album. Excuse me, that's Rock and Roll Hall of Fame member James Taylor. See, the Beatles' influence does run deep. Earlier, I mentioned that Ringo Starr's 2015 induction came with the Rock Hall's Musical Excellence Award. 2 years prior to that, studio engineer Glenn Johns was also inducted in that same category. If you've seen the recent Beatles Get Back documentary series, you'll recognize Glenn Johns as the studio engineer behind the embattled Let It Be recording sessions. At the time, Johns was tasked with crafting a releasable album out of all of the recordings. His vision for that album would not be officially released until it was included in last year's deluxe Let It Be box set. Of course, working on the Get Back sessions wasn't John's only claim to fame. He also worked with the Rolling Stones, The Who, Led Zeppelin, Bob Dylan, Eric Clapton, The Clash, and many, many others. So obviously, a well-earned Rock Hall induction, no doubt about it. Speaking of the Get Back sessions, it is also worth noting that the man who would eventually put a final polish on the recordings that would become the Let It Be album is also a Rock Hall inductee, and that's legendary producer Phil Spector. Like George Martin, Spector was given the Ahmet Ertegun Award in 1989. Of course, Phil Spector, like Glenn Johns, has a wildly impressive and influential body of work even without his Beatles connection. Still, it's yet another example of the kind of Rock Hall caliber talent the band has always been associated with. Speaking of which, the most recent Beatles-adjacent talent to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is keyboardist Billy Preston. Given the award for musical excellence in 2021, Preston had been a friend of the Beatles since almost the very beginning. But it was his participation in the 1969 Get Back sessions that truly cemented him as part of their legacy. He played with the band in the legendary Rooftop concert, and the single release for the song Get Back was even credited to the Beatles with Billy Preston. That's a co-billing no other artist was ever given. By the way, he appears on the Abbey Road album too. Now again, Preston certainly had a successful career apart from his Beatles connection, but being someone that John Lennon once suggested could join the band as a fifth member is certainly a high point. Speaking of musicians that could have been Beatles, let's circle back to Eric Clapton. If you've seen the Get Back documentary, you know that Clapton's name came up in discussion as a possible substitute for George Harrison when George had briefly quit the band. Clapton, of course, played the iconic guitar solo on White Album track While My Guitar Gently Weeps, and in fact he is the only non-Beatle to play guitar on any Beatles album. He would later go on to contribute to all four members' solo albums at one point or another. This three-time Rock Hall inductee is certainly a legend in his own right, but the Beatles connection has always been a strong one. Finally, let's talk about the music of the Beatles. While not technically an award, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame has also created a list of 660 songs that they say shaped rock and roll. On that list, the Beatles are tied with the Rolling Stones for the most songs. But wait, we've got a tiebreaker because there's 4 more songs on the list from solo Beatles, 3 from John Lennon and 1 from Paul McCartney. So there you have it. When it comes to acts that have had the biggest impact on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, nobody else even comes close to the Beatles. With the band's 1988 induction, all 4 solo member inductions, the George Martin and Brian Epstein inductions directly tied to the band, plus the various other inductions that relate to the group, the influence of the Fab Four is undeniable. And it all started with a simple little song called Love Me Do back in 1962. 60 years later, the legacy lives on at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Once again, my name's Kyle, and this has been Track by Track. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Plus, check out some of these other videos below that I think you might also enjoy. And of course, be sure to subscribe, because true music fans always want new releases the day they come out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.